Starting recording and letting everybody in now. Awesome.
Come up then.
Lots of lovely faces
Holly
flooding into the Zoom room now. Just while we wait for everybody to get in from the waiting room, if you'd like to message me via the chat box, letting us know where you are Zooming in from in the world and how you heard about this event, your profession, we'd love to know. We are a very big group tonight, and so it would be brilliant to know a little bit more about you all. Okay, still a few more people coming in. Lovely. Okay, might get started now, and I'll keep admitting people as they arrive. So, as I said, it is lovely to see you all tonight. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We are thrilled to have Sarah Buckley in conversation with Rhea Dempsey tonight for the launch of Rhea's new book, Beyond the Birth Plan, Getting Real About Pain and Power. I'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I am currently zooming to you from, the Yuggera and Turrbal people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Before I hand you over to Sarah and Rhea tonight, I'd just like to quickly reiterate some of the information that I sent to you in the email with the link to tonight's event. So you've all automatically been placed on mute because we are such a big group, but that doesn't mean that we won't be having a Q&A, and Rhea is definitely keen to hear your comments and answer your questions. So in order to get those across, I would like you to use the chat function that you're using now to introduce yourselves. All of your questions and comments will come through to me, and when Rhea and Sarah hand over to me later in the evening, I'll read them out along with your name. The other thing that I want to mention is that we have a special promotion on at the moment at Avid Reader for our event attendees, and that is that if you use the code EVENT at checkout when you're making a purchase on our website, then you can receive 10% off your order store-wide. So I will be posting the link to purchase your copy of Beyond the Birth Plan in the chat box as soon as I finish this introduction. So I recommend that you get in early and make the most of that offer while we have it. And if you are going to be popping into the shop and you still want to make the most of that offer, then don't worry, you can just mention at the counter that you attended tonight's event. And so, without further ado, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Sarah Buckley, who'll be taking things from here. Sarah is trained as a GP with qualifications in GP obstetrics. She has been writing and lecturing to childbirth professionals and parents since 1997 and is the author of the internationally best-selling book, Gentle Birth, Gentle Mothering. Sarah has a special interest in the hormones of physiological labour and birth and the impacts of interventions. In 2015, she completed an extensive report on this topic, Hormonal Physiology of Childbearing, published with Childbirth Connection in the US. She is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Queensland, researching oxytocin in labour and birth. She has co-authored several papers on oxytocin in labour, birth and breastfeeding. Sarah is also the mother of 4 children, all born at home and now in their teenage years and beyond. She lives on the semi-rural outskirts of Brisbane. And so, Sarah, it is now my pleasure to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Emma Kate, and what a thrill to be here with people from all over Australia. We couldn't do this in one bookshop, so it really is very exciting, and even more exciting to be supporting my friend and fellow birth enthusiast Rhea Dempsey. And Rhea and I go back a long way. Actually, I first met Rhea when I was pregnant with my first baby 30 years ago, but we'll get into talking about that a bit more, because I'm very excited to be to be introducing her book Beyond the Birth Plan, and just really appreciate and acknowledge all the work that Rhea's done, not just in supporting families and educating and counselling, but also her passion and her commitment to give back and to see the wisdom that she's gained over the years, so that everyone all around the world actually can benefit from her beautiful work. So Rhea, it's just wonderful to have you here and to be part of this launch. And maybe you can say a bit more. I mean, Rhea's been a childbirth educator, attending births for more than 40 years. And I don't know, should I call you a grand wise woman, a grandmother of birth? I'll have to find a good phrase for this, Rhea.
Well, it reminds me, Sarah, yes, so great to be here with you and with everybody. And I'm seeing some beautiful faces that I know, including my dad, 93-year-old dad, and my brother there. So that's pretty special. But in terms of what name should I go by, going back to our histories together, Sarah, you might remember some of the very early lay midwives here in Melbourne. And there was a group of us who we were called the witches. So, you know, I'm sort of happy to stay a little bit with that as well, with the nod to wisdom that can come from using that. But grandmother too would be beautiful.
And you've had such a variety of experience and work with birth. I mean, you've attended hundreds of births, I imagine, as a what we call doula now, but you were a birth attendant originally, weren't you? There wasn't even a name of a doula.
Yes, it was before the Americans brought the doula word through. I hesitated for a long time, but it's really captured that's the word now that describes the sort of work that I've done over these years. I wish that we'd been captured something with a beautiful Aboriginal name or something way back when, but it didn't really happen. So yes, doing that work before it was named in that way, I think maybe it has much more of a history, really, as Sheila Kitson used to talk about it, that really part of the understanding for women was that they would have some understanding about how to be supportive at births, you know, in the neighbourhood and I guess the village and what have you. So I think it comes a little bit out of that as well. But then, of course, I've been at over 1,000 births more now, 1,000 and a few hundred. So one hopes that you gain a little bit of knowledge when you have that privilege of hanging out with all those mums and babies and partners. And I guess also in that, one of the great privileges has been that most of those have probably been normal physiological childbirth, you know.
That is an extraordinary experience that not many people in the world anywhere actually would have. But in addition to that, you've also taught childbirth education classes. I went to one of your childbirth education classes myself in 1995, which is fantastic. And I also went to a birth support or a parenting support group that you facilitated at Waddell Park House in Melbourne with Dr. Peter Lucas, who attended the first 3 home births of my children. So, you know, there's other ways that you've supported birthing families over the years as well.
Yes. I mean, it's a beautiful trip down memory lane for a lot of us, isn't it? And so again, it was a time in Melbourne, I guess, when those GPs were so important because we were reclaiming something about home birth, or at least that was the scene that I was involved in back then. And so there's a lot of political activity as well to look at how those things were changed and bringing midwives in much more. But in the my early days, there weren't really medically trained midwives in the home birth scene. It was the GPs and then some of us witches who were sort of hanging out, and then the midwives who were coming out of the hospital, you know, could see these home births and were coming out of the hospitals then and the birth centres as well. But those midwives used to talk about, you know, well, we've just got to unlearn, you know, we've got to unlearn all that information or that way of being in the hospital setting to be in these home births. And Sarah, I was remembering that chat we had the other day when the first home birth that we shared.
Yes, I'll tell the story. So yes, because I trained in hospital obstetrics as a GP, and then I I had Peter attend my first birth, and then I ended up working for him and attending births at home in his absence for a few months when with Rhea. And the first birth I went to, the mama had the baby. It was a beautiful scene outside, maybe second baby, I'm not sure. And me with my hospital trainer goes in to take the baby, to take it over to the corner and examine the baby as I'd been taught. And oh my God, it was so funny because of course it was like, oh my God, like the woman owns the baby, the hospital, or I don't own the baby. It was such a incredible wake up really of, I mean, even though I'd had my babies myself, that kind of how we do it was very much indoctrinated into me. So there was a lot of unlearning for myself as well as a birth professional for that time.
So I think too, we had that, I'm coming without that training. It meant there was an openness there, but of course beautiful also to put that all together, to have that training and also that understanding about how to be at birth. I must say too that one of the things that I've been in recent years, and maybe a lot of the people who are listening will know this already, but I think that because of my age and being around for so long around birth, and there are others like me, midwives, who've been around for a long time, but one of the things that I think we need to talk up, and I certainly do my best to do it, is that some of us were around before epidurals took over. And before epidurals really changed the mindset of so much, which I often, when I think about the epidural like this, I feel like I need to bow down and ask forgiveness because we welcomed them in. You know, we thought they're going to be brilliant in the situations where really they're medically necessary. How brilliant! But we had no foresight to understand how they would come in and really hijack, particularly normal physiological childbirth. So, because I've seen birth before that and seen the cultural shift, then this is another part of my work that I talk a lot about, and I certainly mention it in the book and in my first book. So that hanging around for a while and being around for a while, it has its benefits in terms of hopefully being able to share some of that with women now having their babies.
Yes, and such a valuable perspective. And more recent years, you've also been counselling women after birth, and that there's a lot of wonderful stories and wisdom that you've distilled from that in your book as well.
Yes, well, it gives that other perspective, doesn't it, to really see what women are carrying when they come back out of those births, and it really reinforces, I guess, that. Okay, so Sarah, again, some of the witches that I'm thinking about and the conversations that we used to have, and I think you're around for a few of them, thinking of Jan and Mel particularly, and Lynn Dean, the early witches, that when we were at home births, you know, if the birth was going slow or seemed to be going okay and then would seem to stall or what have you, what we would be talking to one another about is say, well, what's she feeling? You know, what's going on? What's the story? How is this that part of the story? Remember, we were talking about that with her, and well, she needs to get in touch with her feelings, or we need to help her to release her feelings. So we talked about feelings and feelings and feelings. Little knowing at that point, because your work hadn't yet come through, or that whole understanding about hormones and the how that all works, so that the feelings, that thing of understanding the woman, her story, how she was feeling before, during the birth, and what that was meaning, of course, we now understand in terms of which hormones are really running this situation of this birth. So that was a beautiful marrying of seeing where we were coming from. And I guess maybe for a lot of the people who are listening, you'd understand that a little bit more in terms of Ina May Gaskin and spiritual midwifery and writing all those birth stories that they were dealing with on the farm. Well, of course, that was happening here in Australia as well, but the Americans being so good at doing the writing, it took us a little while to catch up in terms of telling those stories. But that thing about who the woman is, how she meets that birth culture, how she meets the challenge of the labour, we understood that not from a medical perspective, although that was being watched over by the GPs and later the midwives, but those of us who are more from that holistic point of view of, and not trained in the medical side of things, we were working in that space, that more emotional and psychological space with the guidance and then the understanding of the hormones. So this book has lots of those sort of stories, lots of those stories. Yeah.
So it's almost like coming full circle again, isn't it? Back to the original understandings, but now with another layer of understanding that you can bring to this work and to birthing women and birth workers. So I think it's time now. So we're actually going to have a toast. Now, I know you out there, you probably don't have a glass of bubbly with you, but we're going to pretend that we do. So we have to launch the book with a bit of fizzy. So Rhea, your beautiful book, Beyond the Birth Plan, Getting Real About Pain and Power, and such a beautiful book, such a contribution to the mamas here and the mamas, babies, fathers and families in the future. So I'm going to raise my glass and we're just going to pretend that we're at the back of Avid Reader and that we're rubbing shoulders with each other and we're having a chat about birth, and we've just heard Rhea talk and we're all excited about her book, and now we're going to raise a glass and say cheers. Well done, Rhea, for all the work you put into this, and may it bless many mothers, babies, fathers and families. There you go. I can't clink my glass with you, but there we go.
Good.
Yeah. So Rhea, tell us, we're going to go more into depth about the book at this stage. So yeah, walk us through your book. I think you have a section to read as well. Yes. And then also I've got some talking points, some things that really stood out to me in the book that I'd love to chat about with you.
Yeah. Okay, well, of course, I'd love to. This has been well, maybe to set the context. So some people may already know that first book that I wrote, which was in 2013, The Birth with Confidence. In reality, they were supposed to be the same book. I think when I started to write, it was going to be one book. It became quite clear to me that would take forever, ever, ever, and I may never, ever have finished it. So it's become two books. I must also say that realization was helped by my darling daughter, Mattia, who is also my brilliant editor, who helped me to see the error of my ways in many, many circumstances in terms of the writing of both the books, but in particular that we needed to separate these two books. So the first book, so the part that was really my passion, I guess, is more the second book. It's not true really to say it like that, but it just felt like this was what I wanted to write about, the deeper stories. But it became quite clear to me, and this was again because of watching what was happening in particular, more complex than I'm saying, but in particular about the epidural, that in fact, if women didn't get real about the pain and the issues that I talk about in that first book, then really the rest of this emotional and psychological work really was a moot point, because the birth will already have been hijacked, into that whole epidural cascade. And so then women would be left with whatever the legacy was in terms of the emotional and psychological stuff to be dealt with postnatally, which is what we're seeing. So the first book came out, and then I got on to writing this book, which has been, many people know, has been a labor of love and distress and despair and long, long time. But here it is at last, twice as big as the first book. And I want to just go through and just talk a little bit briefly about the chapters, what I'm covering here. But for all of you, remembering that the first book, which was really looking at that idea of reframing pain in labour to this idea of functional physiological pain rather than, the pain of suffering or the pain of damage or what have you. And that for women to work with that for normal physiological childbirth in this present birth culture, they needed to have good people around them who knew how to support them through what I call crisis of confidence. So I guess this second book then is looking at some of the more psychological and emotional things that can be adding layers and layers of psychological pain to the physiological pain of just the body working so strong and hard in labour. So I guess that's a simple way to talk about it. So the chapters, there are 8 chapters in this book. In the introduction, I again talk about my daughter Mattia's birth, of my first birth myself, and she being born in hospital in England, and how that really initiated me into birth work in particular, not certainly she initiated me into motherhood and her sisters to come along after that. But really, I came out of her birth thinking, you know, what the fuck happened there? You know, I was a healthy phys ed teacher, just, you know, really feeling like this was going to go so straightforwardly, but didn't. And so then coming through to understand what happened. So I became quite radicalized. I'm Australian. We came back here to Australia, and so then became involved in the home birth scene here, as we've already talked about. So I go into a bit more depth about her birth in the introduction, in particular to talk a little bit about some of the more emotional and psychological aspects that were playing into that birth. It wasn't just the birth culture, but really also my own story that sort of came into play through that birth with my first daughter. So then the chapters, the first chapter is called The System, Birth Interrupted. And this, again, for some people here who are listening, they might have already heard me say this, but I wanted to call this first chapter, but my editor probably quite wisely suggested this wasn't a good idea, but I wanted to call it The Fucking Epidural. So when anybody reads it, just read that is the subtitle, yeah. But really in that chapter, I'm talking about how that birth culture in particular is not set up for supporting women for normal physiological childbirth. And I still know and believe that there are many women who wish to, who want to, it's possible for them, but they don't really understand what they're up against in terms of how that culture is. And so I'm laying that out, lots of stats about the research, latest research, and so on, so on. But it has to be said, because to go deeper into the emotional and psychological things, which I do in the rest of the book, unless women really understand what they're up against in the birth culture, then they're not really going to be so attuned to the sort of work that they have to do. If the birth culture was set up to support really women in surrendering and unfolding to their birth process, then some of this deeper work wouldn't be needed, because it would happen through the hormonal system, as you have shown us so much. But that's not what they're dealing with when they go into that birth culture. So that's chapter 1. So chapter 2 is called The Woman, and the subtitle is Pandora's Box. And so this comes out of, as you mentioned, Sarah, you know, those years and years and years and years of doing weekly pregnancy classes and weekly postnatal classes. Hundreds of women. I did that work weekly for probably close to 30 years. So the stories and the sharing in circle, you know, so pregnant women, postnatal women, and the sharing of stories. So I'm describing that, but then also starting to go in more deeply to, well, what is it that the woman brings? What's her story? What's her life experience? What's the story in terms of around this baby, and so on. And so in that chapter 2, I start to make that bridge about, yes, you've got to make good choices. And then also there's this more deeper psychological work. I was also prompted a few years ago by running into a maternal and child health nurse who said to me, she said, you know, she was talking about my first book. She said, I so love that first book of yours. She said, what we're finding as maternal and child health nurses is, she said, we're picking up the pieces of both the births that women are having, but also lots of women are not doing what maternal and child health nurses call the psychological work, you know, addressing the psychological tasks of pregnancy. So that chapter 2 also talks about that, just doing this much more emotional, psychological work as we're ready to step into becoming that mother of the first baby, the second baby, or what have you, and the big change in our sense of self, and of course the just because the birth culture is so unforgiving, then for any women who've got any sort of everyday vulnerabilities about their bodies or about themselves or what have you, then all of that can come into play. And particularly, of course, we have to think about all of that in terms of what does it mean about the hormones? What does it mean about how the birth is going to go? So that's chapter 2. Then we really go into this is sort of forerunner to where I really wanted to go, which is chapter 3. And in chapter 3, This is going much more into this aspect about attachment. And I was wanting to do a number of things by talking about attachment. So this is the attachment. I guess a lot of people, when they're thinking about birth, they're thinking about, as parents, you know, the baby bonding and the sort of attachment that the mother or the father will have with the baby to create that situation of that secure attachment with the baby. But attachment researchers know that however that works out for that baby, that's more or less how it's going to be through that child's life and on into our adult life. So I'm addressing it from the point of view of adult attachment styles. So this is looking at that pregnant woman and what her attachment style is and how that comes into play in the birth space. This is what I'd witnessed over and over and over again, looking at that aspect of, because, and again, putting that together in terms of the hormones, for the hormones to work well, and oxytocin in particular, and I know, Sarah, forgive me, I'm saying it so simply, it's much more complex, but if we're wanting oxytocin to be running that birth, which is what we do want, then the mother needs to be feeling safe. And that feeling of safety is not what often people think is, not about medical safety, but around really that deep sense of security and safety which comes out of having the sort of support that we think of in terms of, so our attachment style gets triggered when we're in a threat situation. Well, what we know about birth culture, pretty much it's a threat situation for women walking into that culture. And so their attachment style is triggered. And so then they start to look for those attachment figures that can help to soothe them. And that means hormones, and to settle them. And this brings up, you know, their early childhood stuff as well. So that's that chapter 3. So, and I wanted to write that in a way that also had whoever's writing it not only to think about themselves as adults, but also to think about how important this is with their babies and how that will go forward. So that's chapter 3. A little bit more to get onto. I'm going into more depth than I was thinking.
I love that. Just to say something, I love that feeling safe is your real birth plan. I love that phrase that you use, and everything you said is exactly that. And safety, oxytocin, it's 101 really. Yeah, it's very basic. And also, as you say, it's, you know, we can have this like mental idea of safety, but this is all happening at a limbic system, at a middle brain level, you know. So that's where oxytocin's made. And if that aspect of our consciousness is not safe, then, you know, it's not going to flow.
And so that then affects the birth. But we know if we've got good, you know, care, and that somebody, this continuity of care, of course, we know would be so beautiful with midwives that they can be that attachment figure, or doulas, of course, of fulfilling that role, to help to support the mother, so that feeling of safety is there, and then the hormones work so well. So then we go, chapter 4, her history, creative adaptations. And so this is, you know, thinking about that small baby, because the baby's sense of safety and security is only as good as the quality of the attachment with the attachment figure, often the mother, the father, maybe aunts, uncles. And if that's not providing what that baby needs, and this is really understood to be certainly in that first 3 years, then that small child starts to develop, maybe in classical psychotherapy, they talk about it in terms of defenses. Gestalt therapy talks about creative adaptations, which is much more, well, the language is just so beautiful. So they find ways to get their needs met as best they can. And so I have seen this over the years, both playing out in the birth situation, but also if I'm doing birth debriefing and seeing, well, at what point did the birth start to really go awry? And sometimes it's really when these aspects are triggered. So that's chapter 4. Chapter 5 then is really about her fears, I'm saying, or what I've called for many years any wild cards. So these can be wild cards that relate to that early childhood story that I'm talking about with attachment, but also other life stories that may be impacting her through her life, that come come to the fore, particularly things that I guess come out of family of origin, because here, as we're stepping, into having these babies, we're stepping into family life and those early foundational experiences with a new baby, but they bring up all of the, all the old stuff. So that those creative adaptations can come out and they can play in the birth, because they tend to be just ways of being in the world that become embedded. Yeah. Then we have, so the wild cards that I've said. Then of course, I love this part, jumping into in chapter 6, the archetypes that I have a sense of around birth. And I guess here we're sort of going very deep into the collective unconscious, or deeper than the individual unconscious. I'm thinking about, if we think about women giving birth, across eons, who generally would be the people who'd be surrounding a woman when she's giving birth? Well, generally it would be women. Generally it would be, the elders, the mother, the grandmother, somebody who's trained in the arts of the herbs and so on, the early midwives and so on. So I feel like that, there's a layer of that even contemporary women, where it's a very different scene, have this deep sort of yearning about who would be there with them to help to build this sort of sense of security that relates back again to the hormones. So I have a bit of a play there with some of the hormones that I think are involved, some of the archetypes that I think are involved. And then in contemporary time, I think what's happening is that we've placed the father of the baby, the male partner of the woman, into this deep world of women's work in birth, and expect them to know what they're doing. So I think that women are projecting onto their male partners, that they should be like a birthing goddess who knows exactly what to do, or they should know exactly what to do like a midwife, or like their mother or their sister. And it doesn't go well. It doesn't really go well. And the guys are wondering how they're holding it all together, and the women are not really feeling that deep sense of emotional security that these deeper archetypal yearnings might bring forward. So I love that chapter. And certainly I do a lot of workshops and love to play around with that with women and midwives particularly. So there's that. Chapter 7, we made a chapter specifically for the male partners, or the partners. A lot of these things particularly relate to male partners in that space. I mean, if the partner of the woman is another woman, then perhaps she can hold all of those capacities, particularly if she's had a baby herself. But the male partners, they're often bringing archetypal energy into that birth space, but it's often not archetypal energy that is very helpful for normal physiological childbirth, because they're often triggered into, that knight in shining armor. And of course, in the hospital space, that often means drawing on, the medical stuff. And of course, it seems, Sarah, which drives me crazy, but some of the latest research in a number of countries is that fathers of babies are now saying that they are much more satisfied with the birth experience when the woman is on the epidural. I could weep.
Well, yes, I think what's interesting, and it's fantastic to have your perspective, Rhea, of the pre-epidural and the post-epidural, because as you say, it really has been, Rhea uses this phrase, the Trojan horse, which I think is fantastic. It came in offering a lot of benefits, and certainly it does have benefits in some situations, but with a whole lot of things inside that we didn't quite want, and one of the main things that the epidural does is reduce a woman's oxytocin for a variety of reasons. You look on my blog on epidurals if you want to know the whole story, but basically it reduces her oxytocin, it reduces her endorphins, and it puts her into a more normal state of consciousness. And I think that's easier for a man. He's not really experienced in being with women in this altered state that is a normal part of physiological birth. So, having a man there makes it kind of easier for him if the woman is in a normal state. He doesn't have to kind of adjust his expectations, you could say. But, the other way around that, of course, is to educate the man and for men to tell stories and to be, to have some training, some warning of what will happen, and that's all okay. Because at home births, I don't see that happening. That the male is in such a difficult and almost impossible situation sometimes. If it's his space, then it's beautiful to have the partner there.
Yes, and often, of course, in that home birth situation, the partner is as supported by the midwife or the other experienced women who are in there, which means then the best, because this is what's happening in birth with partners in the birth space, the best of the relationship is there if it can be freed up and supported. But of course, all of the difficulties in terms of couple dynamics are also playing out in the birth space. So in that chapter 7, I'm talking about lots of that, the good, the bad, and the challenging in all of that.
And some of the answer to that really is what you're saying all along, continuity of care. So having someone that's with that couple and that the partner knows as well as the woman, and that's there to support the male or the partner as well as the birthing woman.
Exactly. And how beautiful that is when all of that comes together. I mean, I think that one of the mysteries about, maybe it's not a mystery to those of us who hang out in that space, particularly in that normal physiological childbirth space, but that oxytocin, Sarah, and it's like that bubble, that it's like, why do we keep hanging out there? And it's because of that beautiful oxytocin hit that we're all falling in love. And I'm sure that's as it was designed to be in the village, that everybody is connected to that baby because they're connected, we now know, through the hormones and through that love intention. So it's pretty special when you're a part of it and can feel that between the couple as well as everybody else there. So that's the one for the partners, chapter 7. And chapter 8 is it's called Her Healing, and this is sort of mapping out a rite of passage. And I guess all of us can understand that, particularly with that first birth, that this is a big rite of passage for that mother, the maiden to the mother. And in that chapter 8, I'm sort of mapping that pathway, that rite of passage pathway, both in terms of the status quo pathway, looking at the birth culture as it is at the moment and how women go through that. And the status quo seems to be leading to these very high levels of, post-traumatic stress after birth, traumatic births, postnatal depression, so on, that pathway. And questioning, is this really what we want, to have women coming out of their birth experiences diminished in their sense of self and diminished in their capacity to step into that strong role as a mother? And then I also contrast that to the rite of passage if we were to bring into play all the things that research tells us is best for normal physiological childbirth, is best for supporting women to undertake that journey. And if we did have that as standard care, then that really empowering rite of passage, and that we would love to see women stepping into that role of motherhood coming from that. There's also one or two beautiful stories in there that also say that, sometimes that's not possible, but there can also be very healing stories of old wounds that can be bringing a woman across that rite of passage into a place of, maybe the birth isn't as straightforward as she felt that she might have wanted, but she's coming into that standing really strongly to be that mother, coming through a strong rite of passage, having some deep healing. And we've seen that over and over, and I know that you will have witnessed that, and certainly in my work have witnessed that over and over, how beautiful that is. So that brings us to the end of the chapters, which has given us a few talking points as we've gone along.
Beautiful. And you're going to read an excerpt as well? I
think I will read a little bit of an excerpt.
Beautiful.
I'm going to shorten it down a little bit. It's not, I've taken it, it's from chapter 2, and it's from sort of pages 64 to 69, and I've drawn a few bits together. So instead of reading them from the book, I'm just going to read them from making my own document about them, yeah? So birth takes us into the psychological. In order to explore this, maybe before I go on, this is I chose this one because it so beautifully joins our work together. Here's the physical education teacher in me before I had my babies, talking about, thinking about functional physiological pain. And here's your beautiful work about hormones, bringing this together. In order to explore this, I first need to introduce a concept that is absolutely key for anybody wanting a normal birth, something I call the evolutionary regression. The evolutionary regression is a process that occurs when a woman's birthing hormones are running the show. It's a process that has evolved from our earliest days as a species and is therefore essentially run by our primitive brain. As the evolutionary regression unfolds, the shift in consciousness involves a number of brain changes. You will already have experienced these shifts during other activities in lives, but you may not be aware of their absolute importance for normal physiological birth and early bonding. You're most likely familiar with the differences in brain states arising from right and left brain functions. The right brain is the first to develop in the womb, with the left coming online through their childhood years. The right brain covers more feeling functions, drifty, daydreaming, intuition, imagination, creative reverie, relating and connecting, nonverbal communication, and even expansive trance-like brain states. The left brain is involved in our everyday conscious thinking life. It's got our sharp thinking, in control, in charge, across the detail, logical, capable, and competent selves covered. In this left brain state, we're fully aware of ourselves and what we're doing and planning. In contemporary society, this is usually our default mode. Part of the evolutionary regression that I'm talking about is a shift from the thinking left brain state to the feeling right brain state. Experienced birth workers, at least those experienced in normal physiological birth, know the signs and the signal this shift in the evolutionary regression, and we celebrate it, yeah? Even my young daughters could read these signs if they answered the home phone. Do you remember such things as home phones, people? Where anybody might answer that phone, and often it was my daughters. So even my young daughters, when they answered the phone, they could pick this when this was happening, and they would say, come to me and say, well, she's got ages to go, Mum. Oh, you better hurry, Mum, it's all happening. Because they could tell that difference when that shift had started to occur because of the hormones, of course. In this evolutionary honed hormonal unfolding of normal labor, there is a dynamic link between oxytocin and endorphins. Naturally occurring oxytocin, which I've come to call queen oxytocin to differentiate it from the synthetic counterpart, which is used so prevalently in birth. Oxytocin drives the painful but functionally powerful contractions to a peak of intensity that then triggers the release of the endorphins, our natural painkillers. And the endorphins offer an uplift and reduce stress. They boost with your pain tolerance and support you to work with the building intensity of the contractions. But much more importantly, your endorphins also swamp your thinking brain. It's this big shift where we've got to just get different press around pain in labour to help women to understand how magic it is for the process to unfold. Locking onto opioid receptors, they block pain signals and also produce a euphoric feeling that amplifies the altered state of consciousness. This facilitates an ego dissolution process. And again, this is common in normal physiological birth, a deep state of flow that strips away your ego and opens you into an expanded sense of yourself and your being. And it's such a privilege to witness this when this happens with women as they're labouring. Indeed, the shift to the right brain feeling state and to the slower, deeper brain waves brings the mother into sync with her baby. I think that so many people don't understand this, that the baby and the mother's brain waves are in sync with one another. So the shift in brainwaves and consciousness that are part of the evolutionary regression are not only important for the normal physiology of birth to unfold, these processes also prime the mother's attunement to her baby. What a beautifully orchestrated process it is. So if there were just one concept I would want every woman and caregiver to understand when it comes to birth, it would be the importance of this process. So often women experience the early contractions of their labour and knowing that these will intensify and mistakenly believe that they are not able to cope. This is part of my stuff about coming to these crises of confidence. But comparing the contractions of early labour with those that occur later in active labour, when the woman has entered into this evolutionary regression, generally around 6 or 7 centimetres, is like comparing apples and oranges. Before this shift, some breathing and relaxation skills are usually needed. But knowing the beautiful hormonal process that is soon to kick in is so helpful to support women mentally through this time. If they don't have this knowledge, then instead this early crisis of confidence is often the point when the previously unwanted fucking epidural enters the picture. If only our mainstream discussion of birth meant all women understood that at this point they are usually on the cusp of the evolutionary regression which offers them the magic support of their mammalian heritage.
Oh,
Magic
beautiful.
Missing out on.
Beautiful.
So one last little bit. So for women who want that normal physiological childbirth, understanding this, it's the holy grail is that evolutionary regression. They want it to happen, and they want to do everything to help it happen, this hormonal progression. But perhaps more importantly, they need to make sure that nothing gets in the way of it happening. And so this brings us to the main body of the book, which is that once you appreciate this, it becomes easier to understand the psychological work I'm advocating in this book as a kind of clearing away of any roadblocks that might interfere with this natural process. The work in pregnancy is to address those obstructions, both external in terms of the birth culture and the choices, but also internal in terms of the mother's story and how that might shift those hormones. So I think it's a beautiful little bit to
fantastic.
my work together there.
Yeah, very beautiful. Thank you. Well said. I love that evolutionary regression, but because it is like we're going down a whole level in our brain. So that's very apt. So thank you, Rhea. Any final comments before we open up for a bit of discussion?
I think I've said quite a bit. Maybe let's
Yes, beautiful. Thank you for that beautiful look through your book too, just the juiciness of it. And I love the way that you brought that those attachment understandings together. You know, I think that, in fact, the other day I was looking at a psychologist called Shafila Sabri, and she was, you know, really applying those same ideas to parenting. Like, you know, the journey of it, of birth as in parenting is really an inner journey, and all these things can happen on the outside, but it's really our own emotional process that's going to get us through in a beautiful way in the end. So beautiful. Thank you.
Exactly. Good.
So Emma Kate, yeah.
Lovely. Thank you. Yeah, thank you both so much for a fantastic discussion. And we have lots of questions and comments. I will start by giving you a little overview, as you said you would like at the beginning of the event about everybody who's here. So I'm just going to run through quickly. We have people from Hobart. We have prenatal yoga teachers. We have chefs from Melbourne. We have people from Adelaide, Rhea Hill. We've got lots of pregnant women in attendance. It's just showing how many people are impacted by your work, Rhea. We have naturopaths. We've got Western Australia. We've got Adelaide, I mentioned, Melbourne, all over Australia. Canberra. I think you've nearly got every state, Rhea. So I'll get started on the questions, and what I might do is, because I've had so many comments, I might take a record of them and pass them on to you afterwards, Rhea, if I don't get out to reading them, because some are quite long and personal, but lots of thank yous for all of your work and for writing this book. So I'll start with a question from, where are we? Sorry, so many. From D, who says, Rhea, every time you speak at my classes, you are celebrated and thanked by women in the group. However, there seems to be at least one woman who is jolted or upset by what you've said. How do you keep going and keep believing that your work is necessary to continue when some are critical of your view?
This is a lot. If I'm going to really answer this, this would take us all night. So let me just try and shorten it down. And again, the simplest way to talk about it, I think, is to talk about that fucking epidural again. The epidural has hijacked a way of thinking about birth. It's brought to the fore this idea that women should be comfortable or can be comfortable in labour. And so then, because I talk, if you like, against that, I mean, let's say, epidural, as I've said before, brilliant, brilliant, brilliant in certain circumstances. All of the interventions which are just running riot in our birth culture, all of them are brilliant in specific circumstances. But because they've become default settings, and in particular the thing about pain in childbirth, then I think that as a culture we pity labouring women we pity them doing the work, and we feel like they shouldn't have to. You know, the poor, poor things, they should be saved that work. And so a lot of women, of course, feel that too. They can make those choices. I think that there's a large body of, there are women also who already know about what I might be talking about, but there's a large body of women in the centre, I think, who don't understand the context of or the consequences, but nonetheless it's confronting when they hear somebody like me, an old bird like me, particularly when I'm swearing about it a lot, probably they get quite confronted about, you know, questioning such a deep sense of what is the cultural, social norm. And I'm saying something quite different, trying to hold on to our heritage, I guess, and certainly speaking from all those years and years and over 1,000 births and seeing it happen a different way and seeing what that can bring forward for the mother and the baby and for the family. So I understand where they're coming from. As I said earlier, I think that for myself and some other of us old birds, old witches, we need to keep talking it up. We need to keep talking it up because the stats are terrible for normal physiological childbirth. The most I ever can understand that there is about 1 to 7% of baby, 1 to 5% to 7% of births are now normal physiological childbirth. So somebody needs to be, a lot of people who are trying to talk that up and talk about it, but it's confronting. It is confronting. So that's the short version of that answer.
Thank you. Sarah asks, how do you change women's self-limiting beliefs when it comes to childbirth? For example, my pelvis is too small or my baby is too big, I can't cope with the pain, etc. This is from Carmen, a naturopath in Victoria.
Yeah. So in that whole question, again, you see this cultural mindset. And this cultural mindset, so separate to the aspect about the epidural and the pain aspect. So women are internalizing that now. Oh, poor me! It is too much. I can't. This is watching this across generations. This shift, but then also, okay. Thank you for this question because this is a key point that I forgot to talk about before, and it's an absolute key point. What women, contemporary women who are having their babies now, what they hear is story after story after story of interventions in birth, and this birth, and it unfolded, it went like this, and what I call thank goodness births. You're hearing all the, well, thank goodness I was there and they could do this, and thank goodness I was there and they could do that, and they, you know, saving the baby, saving me, all of these interventions. That's what they hear. So if that's what they're hearing and that's not unpacked for them in terms of the context of what the birth culture is doing, that's the norm in the birth culture, well, they're left with understanding that birth is very, very dangerous. It doesn't work. Women's bodies are not okay. So therefore, you know, if you've got any vulnerability about your own body, then you are going to be thinking, oh, well, my hips, my pelvis, you know, it's not going to be enough because birth is so dangerous and it doesn't seem like women's bodies work. So that in particular comes into sharp contrast when we put epidurals into the picture, which, as Sarah explained before, really do so much to hijack normal physiology. So much so that the World Health Organization just say that. They say, you know, with epidurals on board, it's just entirely changed the nature of birth. So women have the cultural message they should be comfortable. The epidural is the promise, the seduction, the Trojan horse. So they think, well, yes, I'll have that. But they think that that's value free, or that doesn't make any other, that just means it's going to be comfortable. They don't understand that that is really the pathway into all of these births, all these thank goodness births. And if it wasn't for the epidural or some of the other, you know, routine interventions, then the births, if they were supported well, would unfold just beautifully. And women's bodies work beautifully and the birth process works beautifully. But with all of that happening, without it being unpacked and the context being explained to women, they are left with that feeling that, firstly, my body probably doesn't work because it doesn't seem like the process works very well. And they're very fearful and they're undermined in their sense of, can they do the work of it? This is the pain issue, because of course they're told by everybody, well, the epidural, that is the way to go. Without without understanding that that is entirely linked. So I think I've answered that question, but I've certainly had an opportunity to make that point, which is such an important one.
Yeah, thank you. We've had a question from Bila who says, I'd love to know if Rhea or Sarah are hearing that births in general are more difficult this year. Most of the births I've attended have been quite complicated, difficult, and I'm hearing the same from local home birth midwives and obstetricians. Heightened level of stress at a general community level. Is that leading to difficult births?
Can I start that, Sarah, and then pass it over to you? So one of the things that I say in the book, and it sort of runs through the book, is this idea that, you remember I said earlier on that birth, particularly in present birth culture, is seen as a threat situation. And so for any women who've got other difficult stories in their lives previous to the birth, then in the threat situation of the birth, the other stuff can be triggered. The other stuff can come forward. So what we have in terms of COVID is, of course, heightened levels of anxiety. This is separate to what we're actually doing about birth in COVID time, but heightened levels of anxiety in women generally because of this, so that if women have got other unprocessed or unsupported stories that relate to anxiety or anything in that realm, then of course all of this is going to be fully charged. So it's no surprise to me that a lot of the births are more difficult because women are, and Sarah can tell us the hormonal story about that, but it brings up some of the old stuff that wouldn't have been necessarily so triggered if that anxiety level wasn't pushed. I mean, we're seeing this more broadly across communities, not only in terms of birth, but a lot of people have the mental health and older stories coming forward to the fore again because of these heightened levels of anxiety and isolation and so on. Sarah, something?
Well, yes. Well, from an evolutionary perspective, it's absolutely critical that the situation that the mother gives birth, and I'm talking about women, but all other mammals giving birth in the wild, it's absolutely critical that that's a safe situation, a safe environment, because, any labouring female is very vulnerable, strange noises, strange smells, predators, etc. So the pregnant woman has a sense of, the pregnant woman's stress levels is really kind of an indication to her physiology and to her baby. Is she in a safe place to give birth? And if the woman's under that extra stress, then that's going to cause things to be more difficult for that woman. And unfortunately there's a biological pathway to that. But what I would say is that if you are pregnant at these times of COVID, it's your most important job is to do everything you can to relax and to be in your parasympathetic, your rest and digest, calm and connection system, and whatever you need to do, whether it's resting, yoga, meditation, listening to good music, whatever you need to do to de-stress. That is such a benefit to yourself, to your birthing, to your baby, and to your family. And as much as you possibly can, enroll other people to help you as well.
Yep. Yes.
Thank you. So we've got loads more comments coming in, and for those who are asking, who are sending their questions through still, and particularly who have asked personal questions, please do email us. I'm sure that I can pass them along to Rhea, and that once she has time, she will respond to you. For the last question for the evening, a lot of people are asking what sort of changes need to be made structurally, if we could, or what we need to be advocating for and how we begin to do so. There's a comment here that's just disappeared from a woman called Jo, who says that she was initially, I'm paraphrasing here, but one of the people who had her back up about your work, and now she works alongside you, and she says keep going, it's really important. So yeah, what are some structural changes, or what are some practical means of helping educate women about this?
Yeah, so I just want to say, we know what they are. We know what they are. The key one is continuity of midwifery care, where the women are working with the same midwife across the pregnancy, the birth, and into the postnatal postnatal period. In Australia, we only have 8% of women who can access that form of care, but across the world, there is so much research that says this is best for normal physiological childbirth. It's best for best outcomes emotionally and psychologically for women and their babies. It's just best, gold standard. So that's a big one. And there's lots of people fighting to try and have that happen, and we need more of it. The other thing, which of course, is Sarah, I've had 2 home births myself and 5 of my grandchildren being born at home, one just 2 weeks ago, delicious, that home birth, making home birth be one of the range of possibilities. And we hear that through COVID, of course, the home birth numbers have gone up because women, it's given them more of a sense of security within the context of having more people around them for the birth. So supporting that more, that means, political stuff, it means also Medicare stuff and various things, but that would be brilliant if we got that to be just part of the normal range of choices. Sarah, any quick
yes, absolutely. Continuity of midwifery care. I mean, that's the way women have been cared for, for millions of years by someone we know and trust, someone who's in our social circle, someone, we've spent the pregnancy with. And, I can't recommend it highly enough because I had that with my babies at home by choosing home birth. So there are an increasing number of models, some in the public system as well, even some home birth in the public system. So seek out those models and, advocate for them because, we are coming to a point where there's a bit of a battle really between the midwifery model of care, which is everything we're talking about, and the medical model of care. And they're quite different ways of looking at birth. Is birth an accident waiting to happen and we need to take every caution and just in case, or is birth a normal physiological process where we need to support the woman in all the ways that Rhea's talked about? So advocating for continuity of midwifery care, and personally, as Rhea said, choosing home birth, choosing midwifery care if that's available to you. If it's not, having a doula. The doula can be that continuity of care in any setting for you. And just an optimistic perspective, as Rhea said, politically, globally, midwifery is recognized as being better, safer and cheaper. And there is increasing global pressure from including, the obstetricians organizations and the World Health Organization to really advocate and produce more continuity of midwifery care models. So I think it's coming, and as Rhea said, the evidence is there, but the more we can push and support that, the better.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Thank
Yes.
you. Well, Rhea and Sarah, thank you so much. This discussion has been wonderful. The feedback that we're getting is incredible. So many comments coming through, so many questions. Congratulations on the launch of this work. I have no doubt that it's going to change a lot of people's lives. Yeah, I've posted the link a couple of times in the chat box. Please go ahead and grab your copy from our website. You can see it up there, Beyond the Birth Plan. And now I'm going to take everybody off of mute so that you can join me in thanking Rhea and Sarah for a brilliant chat. So everybody is off mute now.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everybody.
Rock, Rhea.
Thanks very much, everybody. Have a lovely evening.
Good night.
Yeah.
Night.
Well done.